have a small little scene that depicts the pressing of Mr. Giles Corey. Now, in the case of Mr. Corey, when they asked him what he pleaded, he did not answer. Now, this was most likely because once you were arrested and put on trial, your land and property were then turned over to the state. And Mr. Corey here had personal enemies with the sheriff, George Corwin. He was convinced that he was after his farmland. So when the sheriff comes to him and asks him whether or not he's a witch, he stays quiet. Well, since they can't arrest him and they couldn't put him on trial, they decide they're going to bring back an old form of English torture that they had outlawed for the past few years due to its severity, which is for standing mute for a crime by penalty of pressing to death. So what they did is they dug a little shallow pit, had him lay down in it, and then they placed a board over his body. And every hour they would take great big stones and boulders and place them on top of the board. And every time they were about to place a new stone, they would ask him, "What do you plead?" But the only thing that Mr. Corey would ever respond with is, "More weight." And so they would continue to pile more and more stones on there every hour. It would take up to 2 to 3 days before Mr. Corey would pass away from this torture. And this would really signify kind of the beginning of the end of the witch trials, as many people within Salem Village, in addition to those outside of the village, who had come from across the state to witness this, were really horrified that they would bring back this old form of torture just for 81-year-old Giles Corey. Now, the sheriff did try and attempt to get his land afterwards, but fortunately for Mr. Corey, before he had passed away, he had already deeded his farmland to his 2 sons-in-laws, as he had 5 daughters at the time and wanted them to be able to hold on to something of his after he had passed. Now, feel free to take your time around this area looking at all the cells and taking pictures, but whenever you're ready, you can follow me and we'll make our way down the second corridor here, where you'll see more of those middle class cells, as well as what you would be placed into if you were very poor. If you had little to no money, you would be placed into what we call coffin cells.
So is that the coffin cell?
No, that's a middle class cell. The coffin cells you'll see are around this corner on the other side. As you walk down this hallway, on the right-hand side of the hallway, they're no bigger than the size of a telephone booth if you're old enough to know what those are. You're completely enclosed